Good morning, everybody. I'm going to give everybody a chance to kind of get in and get acclimated, and then we will kick off today's very important topic. Given we have got at least over 50 of you here this morning, I think you all agree this is an important and interesting topic, so I'm excited for that. Way to wake up on a Tuesday. All right. So let's just dive in. Today we're here to talk about the Progressing Snapshot Program updates. I do want to draw everybody's attention first thing to that effective date that we've got on that very first slide, so that nobody gets stressed. This is not something that's happening tomorrow. We've got a couple months to give everybody some lead time. You'll see why when we talk through some of these changes, but I do just want to bring everybody right back to that to kind of level set the concerns that anybody on the call might have. Today, myself and David Ressler from the PMO are both here to answer your questions. David has kindly brought Alan as well from the PMO. So you are going to have just who you need on this call to get your questions answered. And if for some reason we can't answer them, we promise we will respond to you after this webinar. I know there may be some very specific nuanced cases you guys want to discuss. You're not expected to do that, much like office hours. You know, those more personal type questions we can take offline. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, we're going to talk right up front, just kind of level set, think about what the current state looks like, why we were asked by the Standards and Technical Committee to go in this direction and to make some updates. We'll talk about what's changing. We'll talk about our new escalation process related to the Progressing program. And then we will just give you some program reminders and ongoing support reminders, and then we'll open for Q&A. So let's talk about where we started, right, and where we are today, so that we're all talking with the same vantage point. The Progressing Snapshot Program really was designed initially to be that entry point for providers into this maturity pool, if you will. It was meant to help our governments to have a way to have some visibility into the products that they were relying on and working with, so that they could have a good expectation around the level of risk that they were accepting. Ultimately, the program offered 1 hour of advising time with our PMO per month, as well as that quarterly snapshot for improvement, so that you could see where you were and, you know, each quarter be moving a little bit further down the line. The program assumption then was that you would in fact be moving forward down that line, aiming to improve your posture, and it would help you to get to what the end goal should be, which is one of those verified statuses, which, as I'm sure many of you, if not all of you on the call know, now also includes that core status that's before, ready, and authorized. And also, one of the benefits that we heard in conversations with many of our 3PAO members who we have great relationships with is often those that have been engaged with our Progressing program were simply better positioned to go through those 3PAO assessments because they had an understanding of what that process looked like, what they needed to bring to the table, and how they needed to do that. So from there, why? Why are we updating the program, right? Isn't it great just as it is and everybody's really happy with it? Well, maybe not entirely. Not that the program has anything wrong with it per se, but really we noticed that there were some key issues, right? There was some enrollment simply to satisfy governments. Texas is a good example. They will accept Progressing Snapshot to satisfy GovRAMP. They will accept it without that expiration date for a provisional status. So we've seen that there are providers who enroll, but they're not actually progressing. They're not improving. We also heard from our providers, well, I'm really worried. You know, if I get all the way down the line, if I get to that 100%, is that going to affect me? Am I going to be removed from the program, or a government's not going to, want to work with me because I maybe haven't yet gone farther than that? So we've seen those providers stalling because they're not yet ready to move to a higher status. This is a place where we believe CORE will actually affect and impact that issue really positively. Additionally, providers were listed immediately with a first snapshot score, which could be 0. And really what we heard from our governments as well as from our Standards and Technical Committee is that in a lot of ways undermines the value and the reason for people to be involved in this program. And then finally, what we've heard from our PMO is regularly providers are canceling their advisory calls, and it's consuming their capacity, and yet there's no real benefit, right? Because the point of those advisory calls is not just that the provider has the opportunity to speak with somebody on the PMO to have a better understanding of how to move forward, but also it gives that advisor a little bit of insight into where maybe we need to do some better education and some better helping across the board to get people to a better place that they have better understanding. So with all this in mind, we spent a lot of time really looking at how do we solve these problems. And I will tell you guys, we went back and forth 100 different ways. And I think where we landed, and the Standards and Technical Committee and our board agreed, is one that really honors the needs of both our governments and our providers. And so really, we're wanting everybody to remember that the Progressing Snapshot Program is truly meant to be an on-ramp, right? And so by providing these documents, our continuous monitoring, our Progressing Snapshot Improvement Guide, as well as the Progressing Snapshot Continuous Monitoring Guide, we are trying to make sure that everybody has a clearer understanding of the rules of the road and the direction and trajectory that they need to be going and what's being asked of them, right? We did find that that was something that was truly lacking. I'm going to dive in to what's changing. These are the big 3 changes that you're going to see, and we'll go over a little bit these as we go forward. The biggest one is you will not be listed on that progressing product list anymore if you have a non-zero score. So just for clarity, we currently have 2 statuses. There's an enrolled status on that progressing product list, and then there's a progressing status on the progressing product list. If you are on the product list as an enrolled, that status will be going away. So moving forward, in order to be listed on that list, there will be a status of progressing that will not be triggered to add you to the list until you have achieved the non-zero score. It could be a 1, guys, but it has to be a non-zero score. The second is that CSPs have to show improvement, right? As I said before, that was intentionally the, is there an echo for everybody else? Okay. The intention of the program is that CSPs show quarterly improvement. So no stalling, no backward steps. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that looks like. And then there is a clear escalation process now if those requirements are not met. So, as I said before, a product is not going to be listed on the Progressing Snapshot list, or on the Progressing Product list, rather, until it has a non-zero score. Additionally, we will not be reporting out to any governments as the product being actively engaged in the program until it is on the Progressing list. Now, that's true to this day, right? We don't report out on those that are enrolled in the program. We only report out on those that are listed as progressing on that list. But just for clarity, until a product is listed, we will not be advising governments that it is meeting the requirements that they might set. Once the product is listed, we will also have a date field now where we will indicate when the product became enrolled in the program, as well as the date of the most recent snapshot. And that was really at the request of some governments who say, like, I just want to know that it's happening quarterly. I want to be able to see, like, when engaged, when was that last one, so that I can understand what I'm looking at, what I'm requesting, and so forth. So next up is quarterly improvement. So again, no stalling, no going backwards. If you have 2 identical or a declining score, it's going to trigger that progressing improvement escalation process that we'll talk a little bit more about. So here is where we really want you to think about those advisory calls. There is an exception here, a little bit of a distinction, if you will. If you, as the cloud service provider, have been having your monthly calls with your advisor, and let's say you're working on a pretty big jump, and it might take a little bit of time to reflect that change, The advisors may attest to progress that is not yet reflected. So, for example, let's say you're going to have, you had a 30 on your snapshot, and now you come in for a second one and you're going to have another. Well, an advisor can attest that at those monthly meetings, you really are very close to meeting a control, but there is something that has delayed that, or it is that larger control that is going to take an additional cycle to meet that. And so that is actually a benefit to you to say, let me make use of these meetings. Let me make sure that they understand what's going on in my system. That does not mean that if you come and you sit and you talk with them and there's no real defined rationale around a delay or a duplicate control, that will give you a pass, if you will. But for those cases, which we have seen where there is that need for a little bit of nuance, we have built that into the program. So now let's talk about non-compliant events. This is a really simple one. If you fail to comply with the terms of your contractual agreement, this includes failing to pay your required fees, right? So just at a basic level, if you're not complying with your contract, that's a non-compliant event and it qualifies for removal from the program. There's no additional steps there. It doesn't mean we're not going to reach out to you and try to get you to resolve it, but it is one where we don't have to give any kind of lengthy remediation period to get that resolved. More important to our conversation today, however, are these remediation events. And that's what's going to trigger that progressing improvement escalation process that I mentioned before. So as I said, if you have two consecutive snapshot scores that are identical, or you have a decrease in score, that's going to trigger the escalation process. The only exception to that being the advisor attestation. And that will be something that happens behind the scenes, and some conversations will happen, and that will determine how we proceed. The second is if a cloud service provider fails to update their artifacts to ensure they're less than 12 months old. This is not new. I just want to make sure that's really clear. This is not a new requirement. This is a current requirement, but it is one where we see issues with providers following through on that. So that is now part of those remediation event process. So how is that process going to work? Very, very similarly to what you would expect if you have a product on the authorized product list and you're doing monthly continuous monitoring. We decided to do that for the pure fact that this program is meant to be the on-ramp to get you ready for these higher statuses. So getting some familiarity around what this process looks like will in fact be helpful. So the first thing that would happen is a deficiency would be identified, and the PMO and you as the provider would collaboratively speak to try and resolve the discrepancy. You would have a cycle to resolve. If it's not resolved, we would issue a formal notice that you are now out of compliance, and issue a timeline for you to come into compliance. And then ultimately, if you don't resolve it after that formal notice, then your product would be removed from the list. So as you can see, when we make a note of this here, it's not one strike and you're out, oh, you've messed up. It really is a collaborative process designed to get you on track and keep you on track. So this just goes more into detail and really is in here for you all to have. We will send this out afterwards so that you can easily look back to this and understand the escalation process as it is. You will note at each step, the escalation process may end. If you have this conversation with the PMO, they express what's wrong. Let's say you have a duplicative score, your next snapshot increases that score, the process ends. There's not a need for it to continue on. So that's typically how this is going to work as we move forward. This is going to detail out a little bit more here of what that formal notice is going to look like. It's going to explain to you what the deficiency is. It's going to let you know how you can remediate the deficiency. Here's where there is something important that you be aware of. When you hit the formal notice stage, the step 2 stage, your progressing status on the progressing product list will be changed. It will change from progressing to not progressing. Governments will also be notified of the product's failure to progress. So again, this is very similar to if you had a product that's on the authorized product list and you received a corrective action plan, your governments would be noticed that a corrective action plan is in place. So again, tying these things together to really help everyone on this journey grow and understand what processes look like. we're going to assume that you guys are super on the ball and you've remediated this issue, right? You've remediated this issue and the process is going to end. So what happens? Well, as soon as that happens and the remediation is in place, which can either take place with an in-cycle snapshot or you can make a decision to purchase, say, an out-of-cycle snapshot to have that remedied more quickly, your product would then trigger again to go from not progressing back to progressing, and we would update those governments that the product is now back in a good status. So just so you know that there are certain steps that can be taken even in between cycles should you choose to do so. And then finally, I'm going to say, let's just say that we never get to this step, right? That's a good win for me, in my opinion. I think David and Alan would agree. If we never get to step 3, we're happy. Step 3 just says, we've given you that informal notice. We've given you that formal notice. You still haven't remedied the issue. At that point, your product would be removed from the progressing product list. Governments that had access would be notified that your product has been removed. If you wish to re-enroll at a later date, then all prior deficiencies must be remedied prior to re-enrollment. So that's step 3. All right. So now this is just a friendly program reminders, things that didn't change, but things we want to make sure you're aware of because we know that we've seen some issues with them. I mentioned this earlier, very specifically. Artifact refresh. You must be refreshing these if they are older than 12 months. So at no point should you have an artifact that has been submitted in your snapshot review package that is older than 12 months. Additionally, that snapshot lifespan remains 12 months. It is good for 12 months from the date of issuance unless you have had a subsequent snapshot. So if you got a snapshot, for example, in January, that would be good through December. But if you then had your next quarterly snapshot, say in, I don't know, April, you would now have one that's good from April through March. So that is how that works. That is not a change. We just want everybody to understand that is how that works. This is the real key, right, guys? A perfect score is not the end, right? Yes, you can stay in this program as you build through the process to core, to ready or authorized, but it's not a terminal status. So go to 100, get 100. We'd love for you to all have 100, but know then that really you should be forward looking. What comes next for my product? What kind of data does my product really access, and where do I either know that I need to land because I work with a certain government? I'm just going to use Utah or Arizona as an example, and they've been very clear about where the products need to live. So if you work with those organizations, hey, I know my product's going to need a core, or I know my product's going to need an authorized, that's where you should be working towards. If you don't yet work with a government that has these requirements, you can be very proactive, and we encourage that because it takes a little while to get through these things. Think about where you need to land and how we can help you get there. This is not a change. This is just so that everybody kind of has an understanding around this, right? If you withdraw your product from the Progressing Snapshot Program, we will be immediately removing your product from the list. That's standard. Governments that had access to that Progressing Snapshot continuous monitoring or matrix, we will let them know that you have been removed from the program and are no longer in the program. But if you're withdrawing because you've done exactly what the program is intended, right? And you're now getting to a core or an authorized, for example, you can choose to remain on the PPL until that status is awarded. And if you remain on the list until that additional status is awarded, we're not going to notify the governments that have access that you've withdrawn. Instead, we would be notifying them, hey, it's time to submit a different continuous monitoring access request because this product has moved up just as we hoped that they would and now has a verified status, and you have a different continuous monitoring package to get access to. So it's good practice because there is sometimes a delay, right? You might have 100 on your snapshot, but you're now in queue to go through into our verified statuses. It's probably a prudent practice, and I know we recommend you stay on the PPL until that happens. And then once that verified status is in fact achieved, we can just transition you and any governments that utilize your product. So this is, again, not new, but something that we don't want people to forget. The advisors continue to be available for that 1 hour advisory session, even after your first 40 controls. So this is really relevant, especially with the products that you want to take through to core. You've got 20 additional controls to work through. So upon the completion of those 40 controls, you do need to maintain that 100%, but you can absolutely avail yourself of the advisor's assistance in talking through and working on how do I get to that next 20? What do I need to be doing for that next 20? The key thing is, though, if you're going to opt out of those advisory calls, it's recommended that you provide a project plan for core, ready, or authorized, depending on what your governments need, simply because they're going to ask, and we would like to be able to let them know they do have a plan and they are working towards that. So that is not, as I said, a change, but it's something to remind yourself of, like, this is a tool in your toolbox. It's a resource for you. Please make use of it. And I'm going to end the way that I started, right? January 1. This is a January 1 forward-looking. We're not going to worry about this today. We're not going to stress about this today. I don't want anybody thinking, oh no, they've made a change and I have to do something immediately today. I want you to think about, I have a roadmap to get to be in compliance as of January 1. So keep that in mind. You will find, if you have not already, that both the program requirements document and the guide are available for you to review on our website, and we will also be ensuring that you have them in a variety of other ways as well. And so now I'm going to open it for Q&A, and you guys have been chatting up a storm in the chat, and so give me a minute so I can just go back there and kind of catch up with where we are, and I will make sure that I can get through these and answer. I
think the first one was with Johannes.
Yes, and I think that Rhett did answer that. So the question was, what's the easiest way to determine if a snapshot is expiring? Oh, I'm sorry, if a control is expiring at the upcoming review. The answer is, on the snapshot matrix, there's a tab called 7 Expired Artifacts Dashboard, and it will automatically track whether an artifact is expiring. Why? Because our PMO is awesome and tries to be super duper helpful to let you know what you need to do before you need to do it. So for everybody's awareness, that's where that lives.
And also I'll add, on the quarterly score letter that you receive, there is a line in there that tells you have evidence expiring. So as you receive your snapshot, there's a call out for your score. There's a call out that says, hey, you have evidence that's getting ready to expire or has expired, which should also be the trigger to look at that tab 7.
Love it. Okay, we have another question in here, and it's a very long question, and it gives lots of detail around, math, which, listen, I went to law school, not math school. I'm just going to trust JT that all your math's right, and this is what I'm going to say. The answer is, anytime your score goes down, even if you pick up another control that would increase your score, but you lose a control, so your score goes down, the answer is, anytime the score goes down, yes, it triggers the process. This is why it is exceptionally important that when we make forward progress, we retain forward progress, including if that means just refreshing artifacts, so that we make sure that we show that we've continued that progress. So just think about it this way. If you get a score of a 30 on this quarter's, and next time you get a 29, that's a decline in score, and that's going to trigger that process. If a CFP achieves 100% in Progressing Snapshot Program and only ensures artifact refresh and continuous monitoring, but does not achieve any verified status, does that trigger the escalation process? The answer is no. You can stay at 100% for as long as you would like. Yes, the goal remains that you would move to a verified status, and we do encourage that. So ultimately, it's really important that we have that conversation around what are your next visions for the future. And like I said, you can stay in the program as long as you like, But forward thinking, especially with the addition of core, there is a way for you to get to a verified status in a more thoughtful way without having to engage that 3 PAO. I do see that JT follows up with this question, and it is a good one, right? So going back to my previous question, a decline in score. The caveat to the decline in score is what I mentioned about your advisors. Let's say you're working on 2 interconnected controls and something happens such that one of your controls would lower and there would be a decline. In those instances, if you are taking advantage of your advisory calls and your advisor is able to say, I know what they're doing, this is what happened, and this is why they've had that decline, then yes, there is a possibility at that point that based on that conversation, we would say this does not meet the requirements of a decline because it is not truly a decline. There is still progress that is happening. It's just not progress we're visibly seeing on the score. So that's why I say it's so important to have those conversations. I hope that helps, JT. And I'm also happy to get on a call, and I'm sure David and I would both be happy to do that to talk through any specific questions you might have around that. So JT, I think I did answer your other question around the remaining in the Progressing Snapshot Program. Is there an appeals process if you and the assessor disagree about whether a control has been met? So we currently have not had that issue, but our current process, I think, that's a great question.
Yeah, let me take
David,
that,
do you want to? I was going to say, David, do you want to kind of kick that off?
Absolutely. So there is a process where you simply email pmo@govramp.org, indicate your disagreement, Kate, and we initiate an investigation where that will be escalated through our team, where that could come all the way up to me to look at that appeal. But often we just have the other the other assessors look at it, make the update if they agree. May involve having a phone call with you. And I'll also stress one of the things that we do is we provide what we call a narrative document that we ask when you're submitting evidence that you fill out. So you essentially plead your case for why this evidence meets the intent of the control. If that is filled out, often the case is already there and helps our assessor look at it the way you're looking at it. Yes, in essence, there is a process.
Okay, so I see a question from Jeff. Maybe you understand this better than I do, David. We reference CSPs throughout the presentation. We are a CSP consumer, not a CSP Azure, for example. Is there a reason?
So in our vernacular, CSP means not just the Azures, AWSs, et cetera of the world, but anyone who has a cloud service offering. So a service provider is a CSP in our realm. Because essentially any provider of service to the government, of a technology service to the government that isn't being hosted in the government's data center itself, from the government's perspective, is being hosted in the cloud and is a cloud service provider. So I think that's the disconnect in the terminology.
Thank you.
Yep.
Let's see. Sorry, guys, there are a lot of questions, which is wonderful. I'm just going through them. When you say this comes into effect the 1st of January, does progress need to be made from the first snapshot in January, or your first snapshot score in January needs to show an improvement? So what I would say is we have timed this such that everyone has a snapshot between now and January. And so we have sent out, the PMO has specifically already sent out notices to any provider who has a product on the list currently that would be negatively impacted by this change. So I encourage you to check box, if you have not already, to take a look at that. If you have that notification, then you will need to make sure that there is an improvement before January, because come January, this new process becomes live, and anybody that does not meet the requirements will be removed from the list to start. We will not trigger the process of letting governments know that you've been removed from the list at that point, but you will be removed from the list, and the expectation would be you would not be, if you had a 0, for example, you would not be re-added until you didn't have a 0. With relation to declines and same scores, that will begin as of January 1. Yeah. So as of January 1, you have your snapshot. Now when you get your next snapshot in the second quarter, if you had a decline or if you had a same score, the new process would trigger. David, anything you want to add?
Yeah, as Jessica mentioned earlier, our goal is not just to avoid hitting step 3 in the escalation process. With sending these notifications out ahead of time, giving folks 90 plus days essentially to remediate where they're currently at versus where they need to be when this program change enhancements take effect. We're hoping to avoid step 1 of the process. So really what we wanted to do was take the opportunity to tell everyone what's changing, why it's changing, and how your participation may be affected and what you can do to make sure that we don't even get to step 1.
Love that, David. David, I'm gonna toss this one over to you. Okay. What if there's a change in your process that impacts a control that had previously been submitted and passed, but the change happens 6 months before the refresh in evidence, but another control reflects the change?
Yeah, so if the control passed 6 months ago and there was a change in the evidence that you uploaded for that control, that triggers a review of that control again. So if you submit, let's say it's AC6. If you submit refreshed evidence or updated evidence for AC6, even though AC6 did pass at that time, we review that updated evidence and make a new adjudication on that. So what we do is we scan through to see if anything has changed since the last time we ran a score, and we look at those controls.
Thank you. We do have this question, Travis. We get this question a lot. As we mature the GovRAMP program and add more complexities, are you looking to a better tool than Box? And the answer from day one has always been yes. We definitely are. We're exploring different opportunities and options. Ultimately, our goal is always to, and Leah just spoke about this on our working group call that we had earlier, I think, this week or end of last week. See, all the days run together for me sometimes, guys. We want to ensure that whatever we put into place can meet people where they are. We don't want to put something in place that works really well for those that are very far along and have a very robust maturity, in this realm, and that leaves behind the people that don't. So just know, yes, it's on our horizon. It's something we are working on, talking about. We always welcome, thoughtful comments like that and appreciate those, and we will continue to keep it on our radar. I believe we already answered this, but I will just reiterate it again. If a provider's product achieves 100%, they continue to do their artifact refresh, and they continue to, just stay on that trajectory, right? They don't decrease in score. They don't have any problems. They don't have to move forward. An escalation process is not triggered. Anything over 95%, right, we have said shows good faith that you're doing what you need to be doing, and so we won't have any issue there. You don't have to move forward with like any pressing sense of urgency. Nobody's going to be like the fire-breathing dragon on your back, right? The idea, though, is you should want to be moving forward. And so hopefully, because we've added core, for those that are smaller, for those that maybe don't need to get all the way to ready and authorized, for those that, want to make a smaller jump but still move, core is available for that. And for those that say, you know what, I know I'm going to need to get to authorized and it's going to take me a little while, we would welcome your continued participation in the Progressing Snapshot Program with that solid score, because what it shows the governments that you're serving is, I am still focused on this. This still matters. I'm still doing the thing. And certainly you can take use of those hour advisory calls, share what your process and progress is. Eventually, hopefully, we're going to see you pop up on the in-queue statuses on that progressing list for our APL. So again, the idea is not in any of these changes to kick anybody out of this program. The idea is, let's make sure the program is doing what it was intended to do and supports our providers through the process and the journey that is maturing cybersecurity, and also supports our governments in their need as they're accepting risk, right? Because products that are early in their maturity journey are going to have a different risk acceptance level than somebody that's further down. So that's really the goal with that. From my look at the chat, I believe we have caught, good morning for me, we've caught all the questions that are in there. Oh, here's a good one. Timeline for remediation events between verbal notification, written notification, and removal from the program. David, do you want to talk through the process from PMO perspective?
Yes. Excuse me. So typically what we're anticipating is, that first verbal warning, if you will, of, the next score iteration triggers that review, and we see that the score has declined or the score has become static. We want to have that conversation with you. We want to let you know that, we've made this observation, that'll happen. Cycle forward the next snapshot cycle. If we see that, nothing's changed, the needle hasn't moved, or worse, it's gone backwards because something expired and wasn't refreshed, then we'll send that written notice. Again, as mentioned before, we have that advisor attestation component to it. So we'll reach out to your advisor of record, say, hey, has this client had their regular calls? Are they actually working on something that's not yet reflective in their score? Is there something going on that we need to be aware of that will be improving this so that we avoid step 2, if you will? If the advisor says, absolutely, we're working on this control, it's 3 more months out, by the time the next snapshot cycles will be there. So we'll suspend at step 2. And in that cycle, if we don't see that improvement in another 3 months with the next quarterly snapshot, then we'll initiate step 2. After step 2 is achieved, it's one more cycle through before we take an adverse action like removal from the program. So all in all, you'll see 3 quarters between step 1 and step 3. Unless it's, as Jessica mentioned earlier, a non-payment event, then it's immediate removal.
And even as I said, with that, we are going to reach out to you. We're going to talk to you first. You're going to be aware, but again, you need to be in compliance with your contractual requirements. We have gotten this question a couple of times. I know it's been answered in the chat, but for purposes of everybody at large, David, Alan, whichever of you wants to answer. If we were to update all our artifacts at once, let's say in October of 25, then the next date for artifact refresh would be October of 26. Can you clarify? And no need for quarterly updating.
Correct. And typically, Nadine, folks will do it more on a control by control basis versus holistically, but perfectly fine to do it holistically, no problem there whatsoever. What some service providers realize is it's a little easier to do it on a control by control basis, but we're going to work with you either way.
Okay, so if a CSP shifts from a progressing snapshot to a core or a higher level mid-year, do their paid fees transfer to the new process or any unspent snapshot fees refunded. So that is really like a very specific case-by-case basis because it depends how you pay. So what I would say is for something like that, we would have a conversation. You would have a conversation with whoever your CSS is to say, this is the situation. This is how we've paid. Maybe you've paid in advance several months. Maybe you've paid for the whole year. It truly depends. And then we would have that corresponding conversation around what that's going to look like. So it's not really something I can answer as a general sweeping rule of thumb. I will say in no event are you going to have a situation where, you know, you have unspent fees and they just languish about.
Yeah. One caveat I'll throw out there, Kate, is if you're in that state where you're participating in Progressing Snapshot and say you're going through core, but you've not yet achieved core and had your product listed, you want to stay enrolled in the Progressing Snapshot program to satisfy your state requirements. So those fees during that time cover your continued enrollment in Progressing Snapshot until you come across the finish line on core, ready, or authorized. So there is some overlap there between the two programs. That's why Jessica says there's no clear answer here, and we need to look at it on a case-by-case basis to see where you're at. But great question.
Thanks, David. So what about customers with regulations that require vulnerabilities to be fixed within 30 to 90 days? How will they be notified of issues under this program?
So continuous monitoring, which is where the remediation efforts come into play, is not part of the Progressing Snapshot program per se. So however you're remediating that today will continue.
And I will say that this is part of why it was very important that within the bounds of what the Progressing Snapshot program is, we have some clarity, right? Because the continuous monitoring is different, because there's not that regular, especially in the case of ready and authorized, a monthly check on these particular things. It's meant to be more of a picture of a point in time for the governments to see where you are and what you're doing. So just keep that in mind, and that is part of why we say being proactive is also helpful. Being able to look at what your product is intended for, what the data is that's going to be, you know, stored or kept in there, and how do we want to plan as a provider for the long term. Do I think I need to get to core? Do I think I need to get to ready and authorized? And how do we get there? Because then you do have a mechanism where you're verifying once and truly serving many, right? And not having to potentially have, well, for this provider, for this government, I'm giving them notice of these things, and for this government, I'm doing it this way. And so there again, this is really just meant to be step one of a multi-stepped process. Any other questions from the group? These have been really great questions.
Jessica?
Yes.
You mentioned that the slideshow will be sent out, correct?
It will. So after this event, we will send out the slides. We will send out the recording. We will also be posting this recording on the Progressing Snapshot page so that you have access to it. If you're anything like me, it goes into your email, Outlook eats it, and you can never search for it again. You know, we'll make sure you have access to it in those ways as well. Additionally, if you have specific questions related to your product, then if you have specific questions related to your product and its process, we can go ahead and have a call with you. You can either speak with your CSS, you can reach out to PMO if it's related to your score and you have score questions. That's completely up to you how you want to handle that. Ultimately, we have some emails on here as well that you can reach out. I'm going to apologize to David for the fact that his name is misspelled on this slide. It was spelled right on the first slide, so 50%, right, guys?
It's a regression in score.
It is. Dang it. Well, you know what? I'm going to remediate it before it goes out, so I'm not going to have any problems about that. What is more common for cloud service providers to start as progressing and transition to a higher level, or to aim from the beginning for an authorized level? Kate, it is the former. It is the former, to start with progressing and then move forward. And the reason behind that is twofold. One, it really does help, right? I mean, and that is how it was designed. It really does help you walk through the process and helps you successfully get to whatever your long-term goal is, with somebody kind of holding your hand, if you will, and really who understands how this works in the process.
Yeah,
But
I often refer, sorry,
go ahead,
Jessica.
David. No, go ahead.
I often refer to the Progressing Snapshot Program as the training wheel step of, through that and working with your advisor, if you're an organization that may be a little new to the NIST control set, there is that opportunity with work through your advisor of learning more how the controls work, how organizationally defined parameters or mandated by GovRAMP parameters work in interpreting those controls and implementing them. So as Jessica mentioned earlier, we've gotten some fantastic feedback from our third-party assessment organizations about those who have gone through the Progressing Snapshot Program are more ready to attain that higher status and such. So definitely, as Jessica mentioned, recommend that you do take advantage of the Progressing Snapshot Program, the advisory function within that, derive the value from it before going into that. However, if you're an organization that has worked in the FedRAMP field for lots of years, you have a staff that's very familiar with the NIST controls and how they function and such, it is a step that can be bypassed. So it really depends on your organization's cyber maturity level, your individual staff's accustomment, if you will, of the NIST controls and how to interpret them and work through them and such. So our executive director, Leah McGrath, often says it's choose your own adventure. And
he does say that.
Truly, in this case, we've had meetings with clients to help them understand where they are and direct them on which way to go, and be happy to have those conversations with you, Kate.
Yeah, and I think that's all really important and a good distinction, right? If you're in the federal space and you have already done this for FedRAMP, you're farther along. You can come in a different avenue. I think too, the key thing, Kate, to consider is, are you working with a government organization who has requirements, right? Because if your product is very early in its maturity journey and you look to that government, and Arizona is a good example, Texas is a good example, to do business with them, you must be engaged in something that satisfies TexRAMP or ASRAMP. And so you would probably say, authorized might be our long-term goal, but we're 2 years away from that. I need to do contracting with the government now. For example, let's say you're going to work with Texas. Progressing Snapshot gives you the avenue in which to begin that journey. And so this is, again, another thing to be considering when you're making those decisions. Just where do you fall within the maturity spectrum? Where do you fall within your customer spectrum? And a secondary question, do CSPs get credit for controls satisfied, or do you have to be reassessed? Yeah, no, it's a holistic assessment at the 3PAO level. So they're going to assess everything. So ultimately, what you're doing with the snapshot for the time that you're in that program is showing that you meet those controls for that purpose, but that does not exclude those controls from review by the 3PAO.
Yep. And because a 3PAO is an independent organization, they cannot rely on anyone else's work regarding those controls. However, if your evidence that you submitted to the PMO for Snapshot hasn't expired yet, because 3PAOs also operate under that 12-month evidence refresh requirement, if that evidence has not expired, you can submit that same evidence to your 3PAO for their independent evaluation, so you're not having to do that work again.
Great point, David. Any other questions from the group? We're coming close to the end of our hour together, but I do want to make sure that I answer everybody's questions. All right, speak now, guys, or forever hold your peace, as they say. That's not really even true, because as like I said, you have our emails and you're welcome to reach out to us, but speak now or hold your peace for today.
Right. And just a reminder, the vast majority of clients aren't affected by these changes. But if you are potentially affected, you will have received an email directing you to log into your Box account and retrieve a letter from the director, myself, letting you know that you are a use case where we have identified that these changes will affect you, and let us know, reach out to us. We'll work with you on how to remediate that so we don't even hit step 1 come January.
Yes, love that. All right, everyone. Well, seeing no further questions, David, thank you so much for your time today. Alan, yours as well. Everybody else on my team that's been helping field questions in the chat, I much appreciate you. Please, like I said, feel free to reach out if you have other questions. Please, if you receive that box notice, go check to take a peek at that. And otherwise, thank you so much. Thank you for being part of our community. Thank you for being part of this program and really helping us succeed on our mission of making the nation's cyber posture stronger. We really could not do this without you, and we appreciate you all so much. So thank you very much, and have a wonderful rest of your week, guys. Talk soon.
Thanks.